Okay, thank you, Jeff. Always love that subtle reminder. Okay, I'd like to call to order the City of Sumner City Council study session. Today is the 27th of September, and the time is 6:01. Again, a reminder, on June 30th, Governor Inslee issued the Washington Ready Guidelines, effectively reopening the state of Washington and removing the COVID-19 restrictions. The City of Sumner looks forward to welcoming members of the public to its meetings in person, but until further notice, will continue to conduct its meetings 100% virtually using the Zoom platform. And that Zoom access information is on the council agenda and also in our city website. That I'd like to do the roll call. Councilmember Potato.
Here.
Councilmember Brown.
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Hayden.
Here.
Councilmember Hochstetter.
Here.
Councilmember Newman.
Here.
Councilmember Reed.
Here.
All council members are present and accounted for. We have two items on our agenda under regular business. The first is the Murray's disposable. Hey, that's a catchy one there, Mr. Metcalf. The Murray's disposal agreement amendment. And Mr. Wilson, do I go to Mr. Steffens, to you, or to whom?
Go straight to Mr. Steffens tonight, Mayor.
Mr. Steffens.
Thank you. The city's current agreement with Murray's disposal ends in the first quarter of 2022. Murray's is here tonight because they would like to extend that agreement an additional 10 years out to 2032. And they also have some minor changes that they would like to make to our agreement regarding customer service and billing and the collections. As you have noticed, we have Josh and Stephen here from Murray's, and they could kind of help fill in the missing details on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steffens. We'll turn it over to Josh Metcalf. Mr. Metcalf, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Great to see you all. So as Jeff pointed out, the initial term of our existing agreement does expire effective February 28th of 2022. The agreement does call, I should note the agreement does call for a 3-year renewal upon mutual written agreement of both parties. However, what my proposal is aimed towards is to, in effect, eliminate redundancies in reviewing the collection agreement, considering the existing agreement does call for mutual written agreement to activate the renewal. That obviously that would require both parties to engage next year, as early as next year, and then again in 3 years. Our proposal would be to reduce the number of times to engage, therefore eliminating redundancies and allowing the city to get along with much more important business at hand than garbage and recycling collection. As Mr. Steffens also pointed out, we are also proposing some minor adjustments to language in Section 9 of the agreement that deals with billing. The proposed language changes are really aimed at reducing bad debt exposure, and this is sort of twofold. This on one hand helps to protect revenues associated with the agreement that the city collects from Murray's. Inevitably, for any bad debt that Murray's has to write off, that ultimately impacts both utility taxes and franchise fees that the city collects from Murray's. But in addition to that, helping to reduce our exposure to bad debt helps Murray's to maintain healthy cash flow to provide the services that both the city and our customers expect us to provide in the city of Sumner. The existing language does not really help to facilitate revenue generation for the city or maintain a healthy cash flow to support business needs. For example, as currently constructed, the language provides the customer the ability to wait up to 120 days before Murray's is able to discontinue providing service for failure to pay an existing balance. So those are the two proposals that Murray's has made to the existing agreement. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have tonight.
Thank you very much, Josh. And as much as I like to see it, it's nice to get rid of redundancies. Mr. Hopkins, do you have anything to add to what Josh said?
No, first of all, I forgot my other speaker at home, so hopefully everybody can hear me well. Yes? Okay, perfect. Really, I would just like to echo the same thing the redundancies of the process are something that with the relationship we've built is something that could be shortened up a little bit and continue the relationship part of this deal. But really for me, that's I just would like to echo the same thing as Josh and be happy to take any questions.
Well, thank both of you. Okay, council members, questions of either staff and or Mr. Metcalf or Mr. Hopkins. Go ahead, Patrick, and then Barb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And first of all, I want to start off with saying I very much appreciate the relationship we have with Murray's and the service that's provided in town. I have no questions about that whatsoever. I just have a little bit of hesitation I'd like cleared up. Is the 10-year agreement term, is that an industry norm or a standard, or would that be extending out from what would typically be a norm? Because I imagine the 3 years was built based on a norm at that time. So I'm curious, well, that's actually my primary concern is that as a norm or not?
No, thank you for the question, Councilmember Reed. I can't say that there is an industry norm, quite frankly. I think, as Stephen alluded to, it all comes down to the relationship and what both parties feel comfortable with. One of the things that when I made this proposal, my initial conversations with both Jeff and Jason was acknowledging the comfort we have in this relationship, acknowledging that in large part we don't see any major reasons for change in the existing agreement, with the exception of some of the billing language. Murray's has 9 municipal agreements in our area, and quite frankly, they range in length from 5 to 10 years, just depending on the city, the relationship, and how comfortable each party feels with the existing language in each agreement.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess the second half of my question would be for Ms. Marquez. Is there's not anything that precludes that long of a term for encumbering future council to an existing contract?
There is not, Mr. Reed. That's a really wonderful question. This agreement actually is somewhat similar and akin to a franchise, and franchises tend to span many, many decades. And so this is not uncommon, and there's no legal preclusion to this term.
Great. Thank you. That answers my questions. I was just doing my due diligence part.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Jeff, could you help me? I can't seem to lower panelist hands, so thank you very much. Or Patrick, if you lowered it yourself, thank you. Or Barb, go ahead.
So I'm just curious, in the future, is there going to be any expansion of recycling to include glass? And then how is the recycling going? Because when we did the tour of your plant in Fife, it was pretty surprising. Well, I guess maybe not too surprising, but how much unrecyclable things are put into the recycling. So is that a big problem?
Thank you for the question. Both excellent questions. So with regard to glass, the first part of your question, I always like to say we take direction very well. And ultimately we take our direction from Pierce County with regard to what ultimately the collection system looks like. What materials we're expected to collect at the curb, what services we're expected to provide. And years before I arrived here in Pierce County, it was determined that the most cost-effective way to collect glass was not at the curb. Instead, it was through a series of public drop-off sites. I believe the closest one currently to the city of Sumner is at the Puyallup Elks. We also, if you've been over here near our office in Fife, you may have seen the best looking public drop-off site in the county as we constructed a brand new facility mid-year last year and opened that to the public. As far as the second part of your question, Councilmember Potato, first of all, I was glad that members of the council were able to come out and take a look at the ongoing problem that contamination has been in the recycle system. Unfortunately, I think it's always going to exist in some way, shape, or form. Just to put it in context, Murray's Disposal has approximately 90,000 residential customers, which means at bare minimum, you have 90,000 different individuals that are taking a look at that beach ball, right, and seeing a different color of that beach ball and going, oh, surely this is recyclable. I'm going to put that in there, and then add on to their families and everything else. And it's a unfortunate recipe for contamination. I do think the partnership with the city of Sumner is a great example. The more that we partner together to get the word out as to the issues that contamination can pose, and quite frankly, the threat they are to the long-term viability of the recycling system, I think it has helped. It certainly hasn't been a cure-all. The recycle markets in recent years have stabilized, which is good news. If you recall, it's been at least a couple of years now since we've requested any sort of adjustment associated with recyclables. But with that being said, I will say recyclables are probably remain the most volatile material that we collect. Garbage kind of is what it is on an annual basis with regard to the fixed costs. Yard waste, similarly. But the recyclable markets can rise and fall, in a very short period of time.
And so you are able to get rid of, because I know when we were there a couple of years ago, it was, China had kind of shut down. So you're still able to find a market for the recyclables.
Yes, absolutely. So thankfully, when I made the comment that things have stabilized a bit, while China has not opened their gates back up to our material, we over the course of the last couple of years, we have seen additional domestic outlets come online. Now, keep in mind, it seems sort of counterintuitive, but bear with me for a moment in thinking through this. It is actually more expensive to truck a ton of recyclables domestically and get it to a domestic market than it was once upon a time to load a shipping container and ship that material back to China. And the whole idea behind that concept is, the imbalance of imports and exports between our country and theirs. Those shipping containers were heading back to China one way or the other. And for years and years and years, exporters of recyclable materials took advantage of that nearly free freight to that market.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, thanks for your answers.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Barb. Go ahead, Kathy. Figured out how to raise your hand. You got to unmute yourself too. There
I
you
did
go.
not have a question. I don't know if my hand's up, but I didn't have a question. It is up.
Okay.
I'm good.
Okay. Go ahead, Cindy.
Sorry.
This one's for Mr. Metcalf. I think if I heard you right, what you said is that you couldn't stop service until after people were behind 4 months on their garbage bill. So what is the new time period? And also, what's your added authority to pursue payments?
So the new time period is 60 days. We would be able to suspend service, and really our added authority is nothing more than to suspend service. As you can imagine, as we all know, our services are vital, and having garbage and recycles build up, is, I hate to say it, kind of added authority in and of itself. Ultimately, if I know for me and my household, if I'm faced with the decision to, I don't know, go out and rent a movie or pay my garbage bill when my garbage is piling up, I think I'm much more likely to ensure that that garbage bill is paid timely.
So I appreciate the idea of doing the 10-year contract, but won't you still come back yearly for that, whatever you call it, the load fee or the dump fee or that you adjust, you adjust that all the time with the economy?
Yeah, the terms of the agreement remain the same, Councilmember Hochstetter. So our agreement calls for a couple of considerations, a couple of annual considerations anyway. The change in the area CPI index is one of those. It calls for an adjustment to the rate based off of 80% of the area's CPI index, 80% of the change, excuse me. And then inevitably, it calls for an adjustment based off of whatever the change in the tip fee set by the Pierce County Council is at the landfill. I'm happy to provide you with a little bit of preview of what to expect in the year ahead. We're getting early word that some of the costs associated with some of the operating costs associated with the landfill and compost system in our county have actually come down a bit, and we do expect to see, and I'll just say it probably for the first time in my 20-year career, we do expect to see some reduction in the county's tip fee for garbage, which is great news for the customer. I see Councilmember Brown doing a little dance there. Absolutely.
Thank
Well,
you
first-
for the complete answers.
You're very welcome.
Thanks, Cindy. Anybody else before we go back to Barb? Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to dovetail off of what Mr. Metcalf just said, that the other remedy for not having garbage service, it's actually a code violation as well. So under our city code, you must maintain refuse service, and failure to do so can result in code enforcement action.
Thank you, Jason. I don't see any other hands raised. Go back to you, Barb. Go ahead.
Yeah, so are we going to be able to compost, food waste? I think they can do it in Tacoma, but is it the county that's saying we can't, or is that something that might be happening in the future?
So yeah, again, I'll defer to what the county system outlines as acceptable material in the program. Rule of thumb is anything that grows. The problem with food waste, while it's a great concept, if we've actually explored it quite a bit with King County and beyond that in other service areas that I've been fortunate to work in. The problem with food waste in large part is the period of time that it takes to break down. This material continues to come in, and inevitably there's only so much capacity to store the material while it goes through its composting process. So without adequate capacity to store material for longer periods of time, inevitably the end product that is produced that we all in one way, shape, or form end up utilizing to put in our flower beds and things of that sort. I guess for lack of a better way to put it, doesn't come out as pristine as it would without significant food waste in it. It may come out a bit more chunky or with chunks of plastic or some sort of contamination. If we ever see our way past this COVID epidemic and we're able to meet again face to face, that's a tour to put on the schedule at some point, is a tour of the compost factory. I see some thumbs up there, Councilmember Newman.
And then my final question probably is, what about all the cardboard? You know, everybody's getting their packages from Amazon, and you know, those boxes are used like less than a day, and then they're, you know, in the recycling. But are you able to, I don't know, is there any program with cardboard that you're able to use?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Every time I'm asked about cardboard, I reflect on my own home, and every time I open the door, there's something else sitting on my doormat that I wasn't expecting. Inevitably, there's been such an uptick in cardboard. I think the ironic thing is it's sort of squeezed out some of the other materials. I personally have so much cardboard that's almost all that I can fit in my recycle container at home. So your home recycle container, your cart at home, you can certainly flatten cardboard boxes, and we encourage you to place it in your curbside recycling container. In addition to that, we offer cardboard recycling for commercial customers, as well as those public drop sites that I touched on just a few moments ago. We've got containers there to continue to collect it. I will say, based off of the overall consumption, I think cardboard is one of the most important things to ensure that all customers are recycling. There is not an unlimited source of anything on this earth. I think we've all come to realize over time, and anything we can do to ensure we're capturing and reusing cardboard is extremely important.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks for your good answers.
Okay, any other questions council members have for staff or Murray's? Wow, you did it and then some, Josh. I think you covered the whole garbage and recycling world there. Yeah, nice job. Okay, Mr. Steffens, when can we see this? We're going to see it next February, or are you going to see it earlier than that?
You'll be seeing this agreement come forth to council at the beginning of October at our next council meeting.
Okay, cool. Okay, well, thank you very much, Josh and Steve. Appreciate your explanations and discussion tonight, as always. Great job. It used to be that you'd think the garbage business was simple. It just ain't the case. And very complex and very demanding and very much needed. So nice work.
Well, thank you so much. And we always enjoy fielding your questions and sharing knowledge. So great to see you all. Have a great evening.
Yeah, take care. Take care, you guys.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Next, we have ordinance number 2794, which has to do with emergency and transitional housing regulations. Do I call on you, Mr. Wilson? Do I go directly to, it looks like he has unmuted himself. So I'm going to go directly to Mr. Ryan Windish, Community Development Director. Ryan.
Thank you, Mayor Pugh. Can everybody hear me? Good.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
We know I have problems with that sometimes. So I also want to point out that Andy Elfers, our Planning Commission Chair, has joined this meeting as well. The council had asked for some Planning Commission representation for this proposal in particular. So this did go to the Planning Commission on the 16th of September and received a due pass recommendation from the commission, a unanimous recommendation. So what's before you tonight is a discussion of the, it's really changes to our zoning code to reflect a mandate, really this being handed down from the state for us to allow for 4 types of housing, permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and indoor emergency housing shelters and indoor emergency shelters and indoor emergency housing. And the state has left open the ability for individual jurisdictions to manage these types of uses through some zoning restrictions for intensity and spacing and densities. And so our code as proposed reflects that. And we did go through this identical requirements that are being proposed recommended by the Planning Commission. We went through those with the council at a study session in August, trying to kind of preempt some of this or prime the pump, if you will, to have the council somewhat familiar with what's being proposed. But I'm happy to go over the ordinance, at least the key parts of it, just to remind everybody what we're talking about. So as I mentioned, there's 4 different types of housing that are addressed in the regulations. And these regulations are due to go into effect the 30th of September. So that's the reason for the urgency here. And really, we're looking at residential zones, commercial zones, and our industrial zones. And just to kind of recap the proposed requirements, permanent supportive housing and the transitional housing cannot be prohibited from locating in residential zones. And so our proposal, the proposal before you includes the housing meeting the standards and densities of the zone, requires a conditional use permit, limits these types of housing uses to no more than 10 dwelling units, and they're required to be spaced at least a half a mile apart for permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, or in the case where you would have emergency housing or emergency shelters, even in commercial zones, they have to be spaced at least a half a mile apart. And in low density residential zones, which are primarily single family residential, the permanent supportive housing and transitional housing can only occupy limited occupancy for 1 family. As you go into the commercial zones, the state requirement is that the 4 types of housing be allowed where hotels are allowed. And that's in most all of our commercial zones, and even to some degree in limited ways in our industrial zones. And one of the things we are recommending is that hotels be removed from the permitted uses list in our neighborhood commercial zones, because neighborhood commercial zones do not have any hotels currently. It's actually a fairly small footprint in terms of our overall zoning. And so we're recommending on that regard to basically prohibit hotels in our neighborhood commercial zones. And then we're also proposing that it be a conditional use permit for these different types of housing in the commercial zones. All the density and height and setbacks and all those things would need to be met as well. And for indoor emergency shelters and indoor emergency housing, the limit would be for any one of these facilities to be a maximum of 5 families or 20 occupants, whichever is smaller. And the reason for that has to do with really Sumner's kind of record on the count, point in time count for those experiencing homelessness within the city of Sumner. which was around 19 individuals. So we're trying to kind of balance this out for kind of Sumner's fair share of what we feel like we need to be providing for in terms of emergency housing and emergency shelters.
Okay, Ryan,
And then-
I'm gonna interrupt you
Yep.
because Councilmember Newman has a question. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, real quick. I'm just wondering if you, and I'll save some of the policy questions for later, but I'm wondering if you can remind us which zones hotels would be allowed in, i.e. therefore, which zones transitional housing would be allowed in, or emergency shelters would be allowed in.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I could share my screen, I'd love to show the zoning map. I think that might be helpful. It looks like I can share my screen. This is great. So here we go. So this is a map, our zoning, the City of Sumner zoning map. And so what's really easy to show here is the red areas that show up so brightly are neighborhood commercial. So this is where hotels are not allowed. As I had mentioned, it's a small footprint. And hotels are allowed in our neighborhood, in our interchange commercial zoning, which is up around 24th Street where we have 2 hotels currently. And we have interchange commercial zoning down around Winco and Honda dealership and the Ford dealership down here in this end of town. Hotels are also allowed in our neighborhood commercial area. This candy striped area allows for hotels. And then the general commercial zoning throughout the city, which is the red candy striping going in a different direction, which includes Fred Meyer. It includes East Main Street. So McDonald's is in there all the way down to Sumner Food Bank, for example. And then even over into our East Sumner neighborhood area, the YMCA is zoned general commercial south of 64th, where the 410 Plaza and that area, it's all zoned general commercial. So those areas allow for hotels. And then in our industrial area, we have a core industrial area that's in the darker crosshatching, and then the lighter purple crosshatching that includes areas along 24th Street, areas visible from the freeway. Those are actually strategically identified to allow for retail uses. Nobody's really taken advantage of that, but it was intended because of the high freeway visibility. And it also allows for hotels. So that's why in our industrial zones, we even address the emergency and transitional housing in those areas as well.
And all of that would stay the same except for the neighborhood commercial where it's like the parallel red and white lines.
Yeah, it's on this map, Councilmember Newman, it's just red. This one's neighborhood commercial. These small parcels down here are neighborhood commercial, and a couple other hit and miss ones are neighborhood commercial. And then in our East Sumner area of town, I'll blow this up. There's a pretty good stretch of neighborhood commercial that runs down 60th Street, which is East Main, and then down 160th across from the YMCA.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Go ahead, continue, Ryan.
And similar to the residential zoning, these types of housing uses would have to be separated by a half a mile. And again, that's to avoid kind of concentration of uses that might create a draw that might be undesirable in the area. And then finally, in our industrial zones, as I was mentioning when we were looking at the map, we have some areas that do allow for the hotels are permitted. And so those areas would have similar restrictions on densities and locational requirements as our commercial zones for the different types of housing. So in conclusion, the Planning Commission is recommending approval of these changes. Bottom line is it's being required by the state that we accommodate these types of housing uses, and what is being recommended is really the ability to manage it, I think in a reasonable way to allow for really Sumner's ability to accommodate kind of the fair share type of housing in terms of emergency shelters and emergency housing. And I do want to point out that we already have, transitional housing type uses happening in the community. Exodus Housing is a nonprofit organization that helps with the transition of folks from domestic violence situation into transitional housing in order to kind of get out of that situation and get back on their feet. And so we already have some transitional housing that's happening in the community. And both the permanent supportive housing and the transitional housing, by and large, if you drove through the neighborhood, you really wouldn't see anything structurally different. They would look like a house. They would look like a multifamily building. It would not be something that would be apparent. The use and how it operates would be different, but structurally and physically it wouldn't be different. So those are a couple things I wanted to point out. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ryan. Patrick, do you have a question back for Ryan? Because I wanted to give Mr. Elfers a chance to address the council also from the Planning Commission. Your choice.
I can wait until after Andy's done.
Okay. Andy, thank you for number one, your work on the Planning Commission. Number two, attending the meeting tonight. It's a twofer for us. So thank you. Just give you the floor. Anything you want to share, with the City Council from the Planning Commission perspective.
Yeah, I think we really appreciated the city's work on this. I think it was not a desirable way of making rules. I think in our opinion, we had a pretty thorough discussion at our study session in August, and then we had a similar discussion last week at the meeting. So I think I really, like I said, there's not a lot of things it seemed like the city was able to do. And so I think we asked questions about distance and why they chose the half mile and why they chose the number of people limitations, and a lot of the same questions that I'm hearing a little bit here. So I feel like I really appreciate the things the thoughtfulness that went into it. And obviously we're looking for a way to support the people that need support in the community. And we're also not looking to be a regional haven for homeless who are just kind of moving around. We really want to support the people that relate to the citizens of Sumner, feel responsible to help out. So yeah, I thought there wasn't a lot of objections to it. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. Again, appreciate your efforts and involvement. Okay, Patrick, let's go back to you.
Thank you, Mayor. And this might be for Ryan, and this is kind of a reclarification of something I asked in the previous presentation. First of all, I understand that the majority of this is kind of codifying to the city what the state is mandating. I appreciate that, and I understand the challenges with that. Now, in the example of Kent, for example, King County purchased a failing hotel there with the purpose of converting it to emergency housing and or shelter type housing without coordination with the city. And is there anything in this update that prevents that from happening, or is it again, or would we be subject to the same potential action by the county?
So the code as proposed limits the maximum occupancy to 5 families or 20 individuals. So to the degree that something like that could happen, it would be limited to those parameters. So it wouldn't. So that's the way the code's proposed. Okay.
So in order for them to do anything different, they would have to come back to the city and actually coordinate with the city on some type of a solution versus just imposing it on us.
Correct. And then on top of all of that, there's a conditional use permit requirement, which requires notice to the community that this is happening, a public hearing, a decision from our hearing examiner, and then there's also appeal potential to court if somebody so chose.
Okay, great. Thank you. I just wanted to bring that up because it's something that I was asked during the last process. People concerned that should a For example, if one of the hotels were to fail or were purchased for an attractive price by the county, that they wouldn't be able to convert something into an emergency shelter without coordinating with the city in some fashion, kind of like they did in Kent.
Mr. Reed, I can just tell you right now, Pierce County is in the process of buying 2 hotels in neighboring cities, one in Fife, and I believe the other one's in Lakewood. And they have been very good about communicating with the cities and getting their buy-in and support on that. So I would anticipate if the county was to do that in our jurisdiction, they would be offering that same positive approach rather than what happened up north.
which is great to hear. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Call on Kathy and then Charlotte.
It's real this time. I just want to thank Brian for all his work. I know he had a short time to do it, and thank you for that. And also the Planning Commission. Appreciate all the work they put into it too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. You can lower your hand. Go ahead, Charlotte.
So like Deputy Mayor, definitely thank you to both the staff, and thank you, Mr. Elfers, for being here. I requested because I think like context sometimes helps in understanding the evolution of the decision making. So thank you for being available. I have, well, a couple of questions, and the first one is a distraction question because now since we're talking about motels, I'm kind of wondering, what's the difference? I mean, if the county wanted to buy Sumner Motel, Sumner Motel kind of serves as a transitional housing right now anyway, and then it would just be under like county management. Would this currently prevent Pierce County from being able to buy and operate Sumner Motel as transitional housing because of how many rooms it has?
Well, they would be limited based on the code. So for transitional housing, it would be a maximum of 25 dwelling units to the acre. So we'd have to kind of look at that, the parameters of any existing motel and see what would work. Bottom line is though, they're not going to just be able to roll in here and kind of set it up in the dark of night, so to speak. There's a lot of permitting requirements. I appreciate that they're being a lot more open about it than it sounded like King County was. But at the end of the day, they'd still have to get the permits and there'd be notice and there'd be an understanding about potential conditions.
Okay, but they could go through that CUP process.
Yes, they
Okay.
could.
Okay. Thank you. That was one. Maybe, I don't know if this is for Mr. Elfers or not, about how much discussion there was around the 10, I think, is it the 10 families or 10 units? Which I appreciate the deliberation that was given there. I don't know if Mr. Elfers wants to talk about any of what the planning, the considerations that the planning commission sort of like deliberated.
Andy, you're on.
Yeah, we did talk in quite a bit about the number of people and where they came across that, and I think the idea we thought was just about as far as fairness and the size of Sumner, and I thought that the basis of that was just the number of people that had been identified in Sumner who were homeless at the time they did that count. And so as far as I think that the Planning Commission felt like it was nice to have a number that fit a small town. And so I like the opportunity to say we want to be a part of the solution. We also want not to bear the burden of solving a problem that was bigger than Sumner really can chew on. So I think there were several questions that came up about the New Hope Center in Puyallup, and there's been a lot of discussion there. So there's quite a few people and property owners who've been somewhat affected by some of the negative impacts of a lot of people around. And so there's quite a bit of talk about the number of people and why we decided to do it. I think there was actually a a few comments asking why we picked the half-mile radius too, about why wasn't it farther away. But yeah, so the number of dwelling units, and we had the hotel operator who came on public hearing and was part of the discussion and was a little concerned about it. Was not very positive about it, and we had a few public comments on it as well. And Ryan, I'm not sure I followed it, but there was a comment about somebody building condos or something and using them. I don't know that I quite followed the direction of that, but there was something about the number of dwelling units per acre on a bigger site in this planning commission meeting. So there was some part of it I didn't follow, but hopefully that helps.
Thank you. And thank you for doing all of the homework for everyone.
Thanks, Charlotte. Mr. Wilson, did you have something to add? Your hand is up before I go to Barb. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like Mr. Winish to clarify, because I've heard two different things that he said in regarding transitional housing in a hotel and emergency sheltering in a hotel. Transitional housing, just so the council's completely clear here, could occur using the dwelling, X amount of units per dwelling acre through a conditional use permit. If it's being used as emergency sheltering, what are the limitations again? How many families?
Thank you for the clarification. A maximum of 5 families or 20 occupants for the emergency shelters, emergency housing, and a maximum of 25 dwelling units per acre for permanent supportive housing or transitional housing in that commercial zone.
Thank you for clarifying. So Mr. Reed, to get at your concern and your point, it really depends on how that hotel would be used if an entity was to come in and try to purchase it on what would be allowed there.
Okay.
Good clarification, Jason. Thank you. Go ahead, Barb.
Do you know who manages? There's a transitional house on Thompson. It seems, there's a number of families that seem to come and go, and, who manages that? And would they have to fall under any of these guidelines?
I'm not 100% sure which house you're talking about or who manages it.
It's near Cherry and Thompson on the north side. Like there's 2 houses there. So
yeah, I'm stretching my memory a bit, but I believe that was an Exodus Housing.
okay.
I think they manage that. And yes, we would need to be looking at that in terms of our overall allowances. And so they also may be grandfathered in as a non-conforming use. We have to kind of look at the details there.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Barb. Any other questions or comments by council members? I want to make sure that we get them all out there and all addressed, because from here, after we get through the study session, we're going to go into special city council session to consider the ordinance. So any other questions or comments by council members? Okay, Councilmember Reed, your hand went up and your screen went blank. You're muted, Patrick.
Sorry, my buttons are super slow to respond here. Okay, so I did have one question, might be for Mr. Elfers, is in the planning commission vote, was it a unanimous do pass recommendation or was it a split decision?
It was unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Okay, any other questions or comments? This particular item. Patrick, your hand's still up. I take it that's just a leftover. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. And if City Attorney Marquez could address tonight the need for a supermajority based on our timelines.
Sure, I'm happy to. When an ordinance is adopted, it typically takes 5 days post-publication to become effective. But because of the deadline that the state's imposed on these regulations, a supermajority is required to pass this effective immediately. So tonight during the special meeting, when this item is introduced, you'll be you'll be reminded that supermajority is required for this particular ordinance.
Got it. We will count as we go along. Okay. Yeah, good clarification. Any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Bart.
Yeah, why are we at such a crunch time? Did you not know about this earlier? It seemed like a couple or 3 weeks ago, we talked about, that we needed to pass by the end of the month. I'm just curious why we are, up against the deadline.
It's a great point.
Boy, we have dueling answers here. Okay.
I can go ahead and address it. We did have a timeline set out, and this does require a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and we couldn't get a quorum for our original Planning Commission meeting, so we had to reschedule that meeting, which kind of bumped everything down a week.
Okay, thank you.
They're running as fast as they can. They just couldn't quite get there with all the dynamics and people involved. So, okay. Okay, we will move on to City Administrator report.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, just upgrading one of our new employees. Tonight, actually, I don't have much. I was actually going to turn it over to City Attorney Marquez to introduce our new Deputy City Attorney. So, Andrea.
Thank you, Jason. I wanted to take a moment during tonight's meeting to introduce you, council members, to our newest staff member. This is Maylee Barber. She is joining us as the city's Deputy City Attorney. We are lucky enough to have gotten her from the city of Bonnie Lake. She spent the last 10 years working very hard for the city of Bonnie Lake, serving primarily as their main lead prosecutor. And so we're just really glad to have her. She's going to be an amazing asset to the city. She's a really hard worker, excited to learn all about Sumner. And so I hope that you all will join me in welcoming her to our staff.
I tell you, I came into City Hall tonight for the council meeting, and of course, I'm wandering around per usual, looking for City Attorney Marquez, and of course, I go over to Maylee's office, and there they are both. And I says, "Isn't that just typical city staff? Still slugging it away, on a Monday evening, which is typical of a lot of staff that work for you." So anyway, great addition. Great addition. Glad to steal you from Bonnie Lake.
Mayor, I'll just
Yeah.
add, I've worked with Maylee for 10 years now in various roles, and we're incredibly lucky to have her. And you may have met her before. She has a way of crashing our potlucks over the last 10 years. So she's been a de facto City of Sumner employee, even though she worked up on the Hill. So we're excited to have her here.
It's wonderful news. Okay, agenda setting. Any calendaring issues in terms of city council meetings and or committee meetings that you haven't already raised in the past? Any issues? Patrick?
Just a reminder that I won't be available for the meeting on the 18th.
Got it. Thank you very much, Patrick. Okay, any other comments, calendaring issues? Don't see any. There is no executive session. So, and when I adjourn this, please stay on your screen. Do not leave this meeting because we will go into a special city council meeting. So being that there's no more business before this study session.
Hey, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to remind council, the special council meeting starts at 7:15.
Yeah.
We do have to wait until 7:15. Feel free to turn off your camera, your mic, get a glass of water, and we'll see you in a few minutes.
At 7:15, geez, maybe we can filibuster from now till, no, we're not going to do that.
I can make cats
Okay.
dance.
I'm sorry?
I can make cats dance.
In that case, I think we will adjourn the meeting at 6:56, and please stick around, do whatever, and we will get back together in another 19 minutes.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Yes,
Are you gonna stop the recording?
I think I was gonna pause it.
Okay, you do you.
Maybe I'll stop it and then I'll just restart it.
All right, thanks.
That's a lot better idea.